Hey guys, I'm Bill Westers, and this is the Encountering Truth podcast. Hey guys, welcome to the Encountering Truth podcast. It's an apologetics podcast where we seek to build our faith by examining the evidence for Christianity and by encountering Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. As a high school teacher, I like to keep my students on their toes. So we're going to start this episode off with a pop quiz. Oh yes, let all of that test anxiety from childhood just come flooding back in. Don't worry, just keep in mind that if you get the question wrong, well, you failed the class. Just kidding. All right, so here we go. True or false? It is okay to torture babies for fun. Now, no Googling the answer. Of course the answer is false. Nobody needs to Google that answer. We all know that it's wrong to torture babies for fun. It's what we would call a moral fact. It's part of the moral argument for the existence of God that says if there's even just one thing morally wrong out there beyond personal opinion, like torturing babies for fun or murdering 6 million Jews in a Holocaust, then there must be a God. Now, if you were old enough to have memory, I'm sure you could probably tell me exactly where you were on September 11th, 2001, when 19 terrorists hijacked 4 planes and flew them into the 2 towers of the World Trade Center, 1 into the Pentagon and 1 into a field in Pennsylvania. I know exactly where I was. I was eating breakfast at my university cafeteria when ironically, before heading to my world religions class. And I remember looking up at the TV thinking, wow, what movie are they playing? Of course, it didn't take long for me to realize this was no movie. This was real life. This was really happening. Well, they canceled classes that day, and so everybody just went back to the dorm rooms and huddled around TVs for hours as we watched one tower fall and then the next tower fall. We couldn't believe our eyes as 2,977 people were killed that day. Over 3,000 children lost a parent. Now, I will tell you that every single one of us, we knew that that was morally wrong. And as I said, if there's even just one thing morally wrong out there, then that points to the existence of a God. Now, some people might say, hold on, time out. How can you say that that is evidence for God? That was done in the name of a God. How can God exist if that type of evil exists in the world, and especially if it's done in His name? Well, it's actually quite simple. You see, if there is no God, then what happened that day would just be a matter of personal opinion. It wouldn't be really wrong. It would just be your opinion versus Osama bin Laden's opinion. It'd be no different than your opinion about ice cream. You like chocolate, I like vanilla. You like to hijack planes and kill innocent people? I don't, but you do you, right? Of course not. Nobody believes that. And so the moral argument can be framed like this as well, where it goes, if there is no God, there is no objective morality. But there is objective morality. We all know that that was wrong. Therefore, there is a God. Now, keep in mind, we're making 2 claims here. Number 1, that morality is, in fact, objective and not subjective. And number 2, that objective standard of morality must be based in the unchanging moral nature of a theistic God. Now, we'll take a look at the first claim that says morality is objective. What does that mean for morality to be objective? Well, it would mean that it's based in or grounded in an object rather than the subject, an object out there, outside of the self, out beyond humanity. Okay? But if the morality were subjective, then it would be based or grounded in the self, which means that each individual, each person would be their own subject and therefore have their own personal standard of morality. It would mean that nobody could tell anyone else that they were wrong. That's kind of what our culture wants these days, though, isn't it? That's why we have slogans like, we don't want anyone to tell us what we can and cannot do. We have slogans like, you do you, or follow your heart, live your truth. That's why everybody loves to invoke the words of Jesus, whether they believe in him or not. They love to say, do not judge. Take his words out of context and claim that judging has basically become the ultimate sin in our culture. Well, the irony here is that if there is no objective morality or objective standard of right and wrong, then there would be no way to say that judging is actually wrong. It would just be a matter of personal opinion. So all you're really saying when you say it's wrong for you to judge is that it's wrong for you to judge. It might be perfectly fine for me because I'm my own subject with my own standard of morality. And so if there is no objective standard of morality, then the whole idea of tolerance is just out the window. Nobody would be obligated to tolerate anybody. In fact, tolerance would be no better than intolerance. And love would be no better than hate. In fact, love would be no better than rape. Culture says, live your truth. Well, they might as well say, live a lie, which sadly is actually what many people in our culture are doing these days, but that's a topic for another podcast episode. But live your truth. They might as well say live a lie because truth would be no better than lies. In fact, there would be no such thing as human rights. Human rights are endowed by our Creator. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, it says these certain unalienable rights endowed by our Creator, that they must be endowed by something beyond the government in order for them to be protected. And so not only would there be no right to same-sex marriage, but there would be no right to natural marriage. Not only would there be no right to abortion, but there'd be no right to life. And so things like murder, rape, slavery, racism, be A-okay. No problem, as long as it lined up with your own personal standard of morality. Now you might say, hold on, time out. You do you as long as you don't hurt someone else, and those things hurt other people, right? Well, what's the difference? See, you might value justice and peace and freedom and tolerance. But if someone else comes along, another subject, they might hold the opposite values. But that's just their subjective morality. So who are you to say that they're wrong? When they act out on that subjective morality with things like murder, rape, genocide, well, that's perfectly fine as long as it lines up with their own standard of subjective morality. And so, what the Nazis did, what the 9/11 terrorists did, wasn't really wrong. In fact, if there is no objective standard, the entire problem of evil just disappears. Why? Because you can't know what evil is unless you know what is good. You can't know what is good unless there's an unchanging standard outside of yourself. It's like C.S. Lewis says, that my argument against God was that this universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? So we all know that the moral law exists, that there is an objective standard, a straight line, so to speak. We all intuitively know this because it's written on our heart, as Paul says in Romans chapter 2. If it weren't, then we wouldn't make excuses for violating it. We don't make excuses for violating for our good behavior. We only make excuses for our bad behavior. I'm sorry I yelled at you or I pushed you. I was just tired or frustrated. I was hangry. Anybody ever get hangry? I know I do it. My kids certainly do, and that sure is not a pretty sight. So, we know that the moral law exists. We know it not by our actions, but by our reactions. You see, everybody wants to be relativistic. Moral subjectivity, moral subjectivism is also called moral relativism. And everybody wants to be relativistic, but they don't want anybody else to be relativistic towards them. Again, C.S. Lewis says, if you find a man who says he does not believe in a real right and wrong, you'll find the same man going back on this a moment later. He may break his promise to you, but if you try breaking one to him, he'll be complaining, that's not fair, before you can say Jack Robinson. Now, I don't know who Jack Robinson is, but that's besides the point. So, what is the best explanation then? Well, if we reason from effect back to a cause, then if there's a moral law, there must be a moral law giver. If there's an obligation, there must be someone to whom we're obliged. Why does it need to be someone? Because obligations are not between things, they're between persons. You're not obligated to that rock you're sitting on. You're not obligated to the law, to obey the law of gravity by not jumping or flying in a plane. Obligations are between persons. So then, who has the authority then to set the rules for everybody? Well, the best explanation is a theistic God who created everything and is over everything and everyone. Now, atheists will try to come up with all sorts of other explanations. They try to pin objective morality on things like evolution or society or human flourishing. But those are all subjective, because in order to be objective, it must be based in an unchanging object out there. Because otherwise you wouldn't be able to measure up against it. It would be like a moving target. And evolution is all about change. Evolved individuals. And society, well, society changes every day. It changes all the time, right? And human flourishing? Whose idea of flourishing are we talking about? Hitler's or Mother Teresa's? Because Hitler certainly had an idea of flourishing. It's what the Holocaust was all about. Eliminating the quote-unquote inferior race so that the master race could flourish. Right? And then, who's to say that flourishing is just automatically good? It's like using the term in the definition. So their explanations fall short. So where does that leave us? Well, we can look at the world and we can see that something is wrong. Things are not the way that they were intended to be. Even Steven Tyler and Aerosmith recognized this when they sang, "Something wrong with the world today, we don't know what it is." He says that we don't know what it is, but we do know what it is. In fact, the Christian worldview explains it perfectly. You see, there is a moral law prescribed by a moral law giver. But mankind, you and I, we've broken that law. We continue to break that law all the time. Yes, all sorts of evil have been done in the name of God and religion and even Christianity. But that doesn't disprove God. Because if God didn't exist, there'd be nothing by which we could even call that evil. But it is evil. And the law has been broken. And there's a price to be paid for breaking the law. Now, God in this situation is both the judge and the offended party. He's the one in the unique position to be able to set the penalty, but also to be able to absolve us of our guilt in what he deems to be a just and fair way. Well, the penalty has been set, and that is death. But fortunately for us, there's something else that Darwinism can't explain. You see, evolution, it's all about survival. But when you're talking about morals, survival is not the most noble. Sacrifice is. And that's why John 15:13 says, "Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down his life for one's friends." And ladies and gentlemen, that is exactly what Jesus did for us, to pay our penalty. He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, so that we might become righteousness, God in him. And so next time you hear someone talking about morals and right and wrong, just think about the fact that the very existence of morality is in itself evidence for the existence of God. And make sure to share that with them and make that clear so that they can encounter the truth. So thank you guys so much for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode, if you feel like that you got something out of it, please be sure to share it with your friends, post it on social media. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast and give us that 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. And we look forward to seeing you next time. So until then, God bless. Make sure to help someone examine the evidence for Christianity. Encounter Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life.